Welcome to Make It Plain from Make Plain Jesus Ministries, featuring Pastor James Bryan, where we take biblical truths in everyday situations and break them down to be as plain as possible. So, stay tuned and enjoy the broadcast.
Welcome back to Make It Plain, our podcast that focuses on all things that relate to life. And so we like to informally just share with you through guests or just our one-on-one conversations that we're having with you to talk about different topics or issues or things that impact your everyday life. Today, I want to continue a conversation that we started in a previous episode that was called, What About the Children? And so this will be part 2 of that. And so as I shared with you in the previous broadcasts, that children are very important. And God looks at it that way. And so whether you are an avid Christian Christ follower or not, you still need to know that God loves kids. And even though at times we kind of look at our kids and say, Lord, these kids are taking everything out of control and making our life crazy. And I'm not sure that I can continue to handle them bouncing off the walls and screaming and hollering and running and breaking things and all these others. But yet in the midst of that, we have to realize that kids really are a blessing. And when we stop and we get finished all the frustrating reactions, we look at them and just say they are a blessing. And so with that, there's this thing that's been on my heart, this whole caring, what about the children? As I said in the prior broadcast, that really when I think about this, most of the communications that I've heard, whether it is through the television, through social media, through things that I've read, through conversations. Most of what I've been hearing has been about the impact of the current pandemic on adults of various ages. I see countless graphs about, the impact at different age levels, whether it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 and up. I see all of that, but not as much focus. It seems, and I could be completely wrong, but from what I've seen in this area has been on the kids. Now, there has been some, but the proportion of the impact has been different. And so when I think about it from that perspective, and then I think about, the things that are going on, the restrictions to make sure that we're okay and that we're getting through the virus and all the other things that have impacted the families, then the question was rising up inside. What about the kids? What about them? And so that's what we got to really think about. When we look and we see and we think about how the adults are impacted, whether they feel isolated or whether, things are happening economically or health, all those other things are all valid. But the kids also have things that are impacting them. And so I talked about a few of those or a couple of those in the prior broadcast, but on this one, I want to talk about 2 others and just spend a little bit of time informally just talking about it. And so as we discuss these topics, I want to know what you think and kind of get some feedback from you. Send me a note at some point in time to give me some insight to see what's working for you and what's not. I would invite you, while it's on my mind, before I get more into this, send a note to contact us at makeplainjesus.org and just let us know if you have some additional thoughts or ideas on this topic. We would love to hear from you at contact us at makeplainjesus.org. Now, when I talk about what about the kids, let's look at the learning aspect of it. I realize, and those that have school-age children are probably experiencing it firsthand, that, some school districts do a fabulous job with the distance learning. And some other school districts are have had or are having still problems with it. Some of the challenges deal with just connectivity issues. Some deal with the type of content that may not convey as well from a distance perspective as it would have in class. Some of it deals with, how comfortable instructors are, teachers are in teaching this way. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And so all of those factors have an impact on the children. So how do you make distance learning for schooling go well? I mean, what do you do as a parent, and how do you make all this work? Well, that's a challenge is really the answer, because depending on the different situations and the personality of the child, the answer can vary. So I was listening recently, maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, to one of the local radio stations, and they were talking about a very similar topic. And in there was I believe he was a doctor at one of the prominent universities, well, not the universities, one of the prominent hospitals in the area. And in it, he was talking about how his kids were dealing with this. And he mentioned he had 2 kids, or he has 2 kids. He said one is thriving, doing very well, but the other one is struggling because distance learning is not for that person or that child. It's difficult for them. And he kind of looks at this year, 2020, as almost a lost year from an education standpoint. And I've heard that term several times. It's like, wow, a lost year? That has an impact on growth. That has an impact on what will happen. And again, the whole question of what about the kids? So when we look at the learning aspect, there are many websites and experts that can give you some good ideas on and how to make it better. But from a layman's perspective, I'm going to say, let me just give you some thoughts, some things to think about. First of all, the environment in which they're learning is very important. What I mean by that is the room or the place where they're learning, that it's set up with some level of order, that the kids can find what they want, that there aren't a lot of distractions going on around. Case in point. So if someone is set up in the living room, but yet the other family is running back and forth all the time, the television's on, maybe the windows are open and they can see everybody running back and forth, those are all distractions. So what it means is the child may or may not be paying attention to the instructor, the teacher that's on the screen. So maybe there has to be adjustments about, when people run to the kitchen or how the window being open, the whole time the instruction is going on, or just some of the time. In other words, you want to be able to reduce the number of distractions so that the child can actually focus. Additionally, the thing that you should think about too is, well, what is the lighting? If it's always dark, does that help or reduce their attention? Or if the lighting in the room is always bright, does that help or reduce? I know for me, I'm usually the type that I like light, and I always have been that way. But I know other people don't like a lot of light around because they do better without it. And so you have to find out what works best for your child so that they can learn. The other thing too is make it more of a environment that is, I'm going to say, cozy or inviting for the child. What are some of the things that having around their desk or around their area that makes it feel like that, okay, this is my little space right here for the time that I'm online. I can listen, but I have all my favorite stuff right here that help me learn. Maybe it's a favorite notebook. Maybe it's a favorite pen with a favorite eraser. Maybe it is a favorite picture. Things like that kind of help from that perspective. The other thing too is when you're looking at the learning part, I would say after, and I know this is hard for parents, but after the class is over, just talk to them about, well, what happened? What did you learn? What things have to go next? What other things do we have to consider? And so when you look at it from that perspective, they're knowing that you're involved. So they said, okay, in their minds anyway, okay, I got to make sure I at least listen to what the teacher said, because mom or dad is going to ask me about it, or grandmom or grandpa, whoever it might be. So you're showing your vested interest in what they're doing, and that's very important. Maybe some of you have found ways to keep them focused on the learning aspect and not distracted. Maybe you want to share some of those with us. That would be great. But in it, that distraction in this time period, even before the pandemic, There were so many studies about the attention span, not just of kids, but also of adults getting so short. I can tell you, even from the kids that I've seen come through the ministry, smart in a lot of ways, but the attention, you got to grab them quick, that attention, or otherwise their thoughts have gone somewhere else, because the world is that way. But you need them to stay focused long enough to learn. So in order to get that instilled, you have to make sure distractions are minimized. And so I would encourage it from that perspective. And then little things, right? When you go through, you learn with them. So maybe they're doing a topic that talks about the earth. And then you say, okay, let me learn with you, and we can talk about it back and forth. So it becomes something that you guys are doing together. Again, I know that it's a lot of work, but at the same time, it's a beneficial thing. On another topic, I also want to talk to you about just looking at it from the family perspective. No matter the size of your family, large, small, in between, whatever it might be, whether it's just single parent or both parents, whatever your family dynamic is, during these times, you have to make it a benefit. So whenever challenges come to you, you have to look at it from the perspective of, you know what? This is a great time for me and my child to bond. And so in addition to the challenges of learning, we can actually find topics to talk about. And you begin to share and communicate more so with one another. But you talk about it at whatever age level they are. So maybe a child is 4 years old, so you may talk about certain parts of your day or things that are going through your mind at a 4-year-old level so they can understand. But the things that are positive, not all your worries, but the things that will help them have a communication and a connection with you. And then you begin to get them excited, always painting a picture of things that you'll be able to do together. Maybe you say, okay, the parks are still open. So because the parks are still open, that maybe on Saturday morning, we'll get up and go and hike through whatever this park is, or we'll look at the water, or we'll look at the ducks, or whatever it might be, and say, oh, by the way, we'll make a little picnic dinner with us, or lunch, or something. Make it exciting from that perspective. And what you're doing is bonding. You're tightening the family structure. You're tightening the relationship between the child and yourself. It also makes them feel like that you as a parent care so much, you're focusing attention on them. And that's a good thing, because that helps them grow. And then what you do in this bonding time, you let them experience just other things. So one of the things you can do, let's use the same example of going out to like one of the parks and all. And while you're at the park, not only are you playing, then you talk about, hey, look at that bird. Do you know what kind it is? Oh, well, look at this tree. Look at how it's growing. And you begin to point out things in everyday life and nature and other things that so they can become aware of those things. And then you begin to talk about it. What about those signs? What do those signs say? What do you think that means? And now everything again, I'm on this whole adventure kick, becomes an adventure with them. So it's not a laborious learning that they may say, oh, here we go again. But it's one of those things that are fun about being aware of the surroundings and what's happening and getting just the exposure to what's going on around them. Those are bonding moments. Those are teaching moments. And you can begin to share with them. And then you enter in games, or I'll race you from this point to that point. Or how long can you stand on one foot? Just making up different games. And so now they're able to understand the interaction. So they're not just sitting in front of a gaming console and not communicating with you. Instead, they're communicating on a regular basis. Maybe you're able to take them to some place where there's a zoo or a farm or something, whether that's open in your area. But what that does, again, it creates bonding special moments that they'll always remember, and it would also help them begin to think broader. And then at times challenge them, because one of the things you want to make sure that they get is the ability for critical thinking. Not just what they're just told to do, which is important in a lot of cases, but then to understand how to critically think, how to examine a situation. The reason why that's important, somewhere down in, down the line in life, things will come up that don't necessarily fit the textbook answer. And so they have to figure out, well, how do I process this? And because you spend time critically thinking with them and teaching them how to, then they're able to handle life better. Even when things come across their path that don't necessarily support their textbook answer. And so all of these things are still learning environments. They're fun. And these are things that help your children grow. One of the real concerns that I have is that there are so many kids that are falling behind because of the interruption right now. Some were struggling anyway, and there's always been a concern there to help. But now even more so when people are left at home for the most part, that they're still falling farther behind. What happens to them later in life? The impact is, right now, it can't be seen, but it is potentially enormous. How do you deal with that? That's a real concern. What about the children? Because they are our future. So what do you think some of the answers might be? I think it's something that is worth looking at and probably needs to be addressed, yes, at the political level of our counties, our school systems, at the federal level and everything else, but it also needs to be addressed at home, and it has to be addressed in a community. And so that's something that we have to really think about, because they are ultimately the ones that are going to lead. And we have to make sure that, they are equipped for it. We can't just say, oh, this happened, and well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. I think when I look back over time, for me personally, a lot of my best learning moments were times when I spent with my dad and he just taught me things. Didn't always like being woken up early on Saturday mornings, as I always tell my church about, how he always made sure on Saturdays I had something to do, which was a chore with him or a job that he had to go do or something else. So I wasn't able to just be lazy lying around as much. But I had a lot of time one-on-one and a lot of things that were instilled. And sometimes I didn't appreciate it until later. But some things I did, because I knew from there that he cared. 2, that he was doing everything he could possibly do to make sure that I get everything that I need to be successful. 3, he was showing me the ins and outs of how to not only work in general, but ins and outs of life. 4, he helped me to see people in many different environments so that I can understand and relate. And there were countless other things. It was in these moments that I learned so much about life, because a lot of things about life don't fit a textbook all the time. And so that's how I began to learn. Many people have stories like that help them also. So this is a learning opportunity for parents and children. But don't forget the children. It is so important for them. They're looking to you as a parent to guide them, to show them the way. So hopefully that gives you some insight, some things to think about. And I would tell you that these are times as parents that we have to unleash our creativity. What do I mean by that? Well, creativity means that you're able to find ways that you normally wouldn't, but ways to encourage your child in creative ways that aren't your normal, okay, get up and go study. But you come up with not only games, but adventures. I use those words a lot, but games and adventures that will help them to grow, stimulate their minds, stimulate their imaginations, just be able to exercise their bodies, get the blood flowing so they can now concentrate. All those things that they can think about learning and growing, as opposed to, oh no, what's the next virus news coming, and things like that. That's how you deal with it. So many families in the past have gone through even tougher things in life and were able to get through it because of focused focus concentration on things such as this. So hopefully this is helpful. Share this with anyone else that you know of that has podcast accessibility, which everyone can. But I want to make sure you're able to share this broadcast so that it will be helpful, and at the same time stimulate certain ideas on how to make sure the children are taken care of. Until next time, God bless, and we'll talk to you then.